Hey, how you doing? My name is Donald King. I recently posted a video on YouTube called The True Significance of Prime Numbers. If you haven't had an opportunity to review it yet, I suggest that you take a little bit of time and check it out. The information recorded in it has practical applications to every institution of thought, ranging from faith-based and philosophical paradigms all the way to medical and scientific applications. So it's definitely something you want to check out. I'm actually recording a new series of videos right now based on the true significance of prime numbers. In that video, I covered a lot of information, and I got some responses from people saying that it's like some of it was pretty compacted. It was a little dense. I want to take some time to kind of break apart some of the ideas so that we can explore them in greater detail. For this video, I've enlisted some help to make sure that it's like I can probably stay in theme and in pace. And so I'm going to be speaking back and forth with someone who's going to be asking me questions. And also, I'm going to be referring to some notes. The purpose of these videos is to introduce to you a concept called relevance-based thinking. Relevance-based thinking is basically the ability to process information exclusively by tracing all things back to natural values that align with the systemic logic of bodily function. Okay. In relevance-based thinking, we use natural values, occurrences, and phenomena to decipher intellectual truths about, the world and the universe around us. So my purpose, my goal is to teach people how to learn how to interpret these this multitude of different expressions for natural values based on roles that they play within a given context, the roles they play within the context of the body that they belong to. One thing that I want to say is that if I'm moving fast, I want you all to, if there's any sort of confusion, please respond to me in the comments section below, because we want to turn this into a dialogue. So I don't want to get too far ahead. I want to stay pretty much in theme, and I want you to understand this. So in the video, The True Significance of Prime Numbers, I introduce to you all the authentic mapping system for all of existence. The authentic mapping system for all of existence is basically made up of two parts. There are quantitative values and correlating intellectual themes. Basically, it's numbers and faculties of intelligence. By faculties of intelligence, I mean observable, progressive modes of dimensional and directional force. We've been taught to rely on numbers, and in place of numbers, what I want to do is introduce the concept of quantitative values. Okay, numbers actually correlate with intellectual themes. They don't kind of progress in the way that we've been taught that they do. They don't just expand out into infinity and just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. They actually collapse into one another, and I'm going to explain that within the course of the next few videos. But for right now, I just want to introduce that concept to you. Together, these two values, quantitative values and intellectual themes, they form living structural blueprints. Okay? In order to understand the concept of intellectual blueprints, we have to break existence up into two parts. There is matter, and then there's intelligence, or there's matter and spatial relevance. Matter and space. God. God is not an external force. God is not a heavenly father. God is not a judge. God isn't some bully who coerces and manipulates people with the concepts of favor and punishment. God doesn't have to leverage fear of pain and retribution against people. He isn't a magician. He's not some external force that can be, bartered with and manipulated by our actions and resources. Okay, so in order to understand how God and what God really is, we need to distance ourselves from what we've learned about it. God isn't some external force that should be appeased. God is actually a living, breathing, growing organism. God is the living universe. Okay? So let's define the living universe. Living universe is is an eternal body. Essentially, is what it is. It's bodies inside of bodies inside of bodies inside of bodies. It's living organisms that collectivize to form a greater living organism that collectivize to form a greater living organism. So basically, the universe can be defined as bodies inside of bodies inside of bodies inside of bodies, infinitely in both directions of scale. Okay. We are essentially structural building blocks that belong to a greater body. God itself is a living structural building block that belongs to a body greater than it, and so on and so forth. Your body is comprised of multitudes of organisms, and so is all of existence, so is all the universe. Okay? So what defines a living organism? All living organisms, they basically operate by means of a systemic logic that I refer to as CCR. CCR is consumption, conversion, and redistribution of energy. And that's basically in terms of bodily relevance, not physical form, okay? So when I say CCR, this pretty much encompasses plant life. It encompasses marine life. It encompasses, mammals. Anything that you can think of, it basically follows the logic of CCR. The three faculties of CCR are ingestion, respiration, and cognition. When you inhale, you breathe in, you take in what's primarily oxygen. Your body processes it, and then it redistributes it into the atmosphere. It converts it from oxygen to primarily carbon dioxide. So basically, if we're thinking in terms of systemic logic, the function that our bodies serve in terms of the atmosphere is converting oxygen, or primarily oxygen, to carbon dioxide. When we eat foods that enter in our body in terms of one form of energy. Our bodies convert that energy, and then it passes on from us in the form of waste material, which actually is supposed to be a food source for, another type of life form. So basically what we do is we consume energy, we convert it, and then we redistribute it into a context. So basically, when we consume energy and we convert it, what we consume, ingest, once it passes from us, it is meant to dissolve into the context that we belong to. Okay? So that's what CCR is. Okay, so structural building blocks that belong to the body of this universe and belong to the body of this planet, they belong to and contribute to greater cycles. So they take from the context, but they equally give back to the context as well. That is what happens with structural building blocks that belong to the body of this universe. Let me see. Humans, we actually manifest within the bodily context of this planet as neurons. We are nerve cells for the body of this planet. This planet is herself actually a neuron that belongs to a greater organ or greater body within the context of our universal body, or what we would refer to as God. Okay, so let's get into the concept of parasites. What is a parasite? Well, a parasite is an organism that survives by attaching itself to and exploiting the energy conversion cycles and the energy distribution cycles. That is the life force of other organisms or a greater organism, what we would refer to as a host organism. A parasite's primary objective is consumption. Okay? The systemic logic of its root paradigms and mode of thinking is to consume, because a parasite is essentially an incomplete life form. It's not complete within itself. Parasites exploit organisms by restructuring the bodily contexts of the organism that they attach to. Say, for instance, a leech attaches to your skin. Well, basically what it does is it burrows its way into your skin, and it works almost like an auxiliary vein. Well, that's essentially how all parasites work. They just exploit the resources of a host organism by restructuring the energy distribution cycle in the context of the host organism's body. When parasites collectivize, they form what we would refer to as viruses. A virus is a massive swarm or a large group of parasites. Any organism that becomes ensnared in the vices of a parasite A parasitic organism, a parasitic force, or a parasitic construct becomes what we would refer to as a slave. A slave is essentially any organism whose energy, efforts, or life force is exploited by another organism. And regardless of application, this definition is absolute. So, moving forward, we reach the concept of devil. What is a devil? Okay, religion tries to paint it as this mysterious figure that has some anomalous value that we can't really quantify or define. But that's not actually what a devil is. The devil is essentially a parasite that is attached to the body of this planet. Okay. This devil organism is made up of structural building blocks that closely resemble the structural building blocks of our planetary body. The actual devil is synonymous with what most people have been conditioned to refer to as God. It is an external force that has restructured the bodily context of our planet and in so subjugated or enslaved the organisms that this planetary body is comprised of. Okay, how has this devil parasite, how has it infiltrated and restructured the context, the bodily context of the planet that we belong to? Well, basically, it's done so through the implementation and enforcement of parasitic concepts and parasitic paradigms like law, education, commerce, governance. Okay, agriculture, and that would be things like landscaping, architecture, and civil engineering. And by means of harvested energy like electricity and natural gas, through industry, through social hierarchy, through media and entertainment that is filtered and controlled information or perception-oriented information. And concepts like war, and then that's just to name a few things. You know, this great serpent or parasite has infected the structural building blocks of this planet with a virus. And again, as I've already suggested, a virus is a swarm of parasites that operate on a smaller scaled plane of existence. So ego, what is ego? Well, the ego has two applications actually. First, it's a greater virus that is affecting the homocellular network. That's us. And individually, it manifests as parasites that are singularly attached to human hosts. Okay, so let's break this concept down. The ego manifesting within the planetary context is a virus. It manifests as what we would refer to as a neurotoxin. Basically, a neurotoxin is a poison or an illness that incapacitates the central nervous system of a host organism. As I've said before, humans manifest as neurons within the planetary context. So incapacitating humans is essentially shutting down the central nervous system of this planet. We are nerve cells for the body of this planet. Egoviron are parasites that are attached to the human brain. They operate and procreate through what modern science refers to as lysogenic reproduction. We're going to explore egoviron more so than we are going to explore the virus component of ego in this video. And the reason why is because they have relevance to each one of us individually. Again, like I told you before, the egoviron are parasites that are attached to the human brain. They feed on hormones and neurotransmitters produced by the brain. Things like oxytocin, vasopressin, dopamine, serotonin, insulin, and other chemicals that are produced by or compatible with the human body. We're going to get into the concept of addiction. Some people are addicted to food, some people are addicted to sex, some people are addicted to drugs. Well, essentially the way it ends up working is like this. If a person is addicted, addiction is a secondary hunger. So say a person is addicted to food, like sweet and fatty foods. Well, essentially it's not necessarily because they're addicted to the food so much as it is their parasite or their egoviron is addicted to insulin. Again, addiction is a secondary hunger. So when the egoviron is craving insulin, it's going to use perception to steer a person into indulging in substances and indulging behaviors that are going to produce certain chemical production in the body so that it can feed. Let's look at it like this. Let's say the ego or the ego parasite hacks the perspective, that is the natural thought process of human beings, and steers us or coerces us into doing its bidding through perception. Perception is essentially the ego's thought process. Ego viron, they're physically attached to our brain. Its synaptic wiring is integral with our own synaptic wiring. Its brain is part of our brain. That means that its thoughts affect our thoughts, and its needs become our needs, and its appetites become our appetites. And this introduces us or transitions us to the concept of perception. We're going to start by differentiating two concepts. We need to separate perspective and perception. They're two separate values. They're not one and the same. Perspective is a vantage point with respect to a temporal or spatial value within a given context, okay? The perception is an intellectually hollow construct. It processes information exclusively based on surface assessments of value. Okay, the perception, it does not think in terms of contextual, temporal, or spatial relevance. It instead bases its problem-solving methods and its interpretation of reality or its belief system exclusively on physical observation, that is, the surface assessment of value. Perception manifests in our minds as opinion, want, memory, faith, faith being the belief, or faith being a belief, absent independent and objective investigation. It manifests in the form of intellectual teetering. Intellectual teetering is what most people refer to as confusion or fear. And it also manifests in the form of illusions. It manifests in the form of what many people refer to as possibility. And most importantly, it manifests in the form of what we refer to as personal importance. And I want to take a couple seconds to kind of address that. It manifests in the form of personal importance and what we would refer to as individuality. Individuality is a lack of cellular integrity, structural imbalance. These intellectual faculties of perception, they're not real. They are devices, they're impulses that the ego parasite uses to steer us in our behaviors. Much like its proprietor, the perception is parasitic in nature. It cannot survive without being attached to a host consciousness or perspective. Opinion cannot survive without a consciousness to attach to. It cannot survive without a perspective to attach to. Opinion without a person cannot exist, but a person can exist without opinion. The perception's job is to provide stimulus that will result in chemical production. This is how the ego parasite feeds. When our brains aren't producing enough chemicals to satiate the ego parasite's appetite, it results in what most of us recognize as being boredom and depression, and also what we would refer to as neurological disorders. Posturing is a separate facet of the ego's intellectual makeup. It's tuned to the collective virus, as opposed to perception, which takes place exclusively between a parasite and a host. As it would apply to us, posturing can most accurately be defined as the desire to prove worth to others or to build reputation. Posturing is closely related to addiction, and I kind of want to break that concept down here a little bit. The purpose of posturing is twofold, for the ego parasite at least. Firstly, posturing is meant to result in acquisition for the ego parasite and the host of the ego parasite. Acquisition lends itself to chemical production, but let's just call acquisition the assimilation of external values and properties. Secondly, posturing results in chemical production for human beings, okay? So again, the ego parasite's synaptic wiring is entangled with our own. The perception interprets acquisition as being synonymous with what we would refer to as love. This part's a little difficult to explain, so I'm just going to be as succinct as I possibly can. Our interpretations of love and fear are way off. Love and fear are not emotions, they're eternal values, they're eternal frequencies. Love manifests as what we would refer to as bonding, and fear manifests as what we would refer to as distance or separation. Okay? So, I explained this in the video, the true significance of prime numbers, and I really, again, I encourage you to go and watch that video because it ties in directly into this video, and I think that it's like you'll find this information definitely beneficial. Again, the ego's synaptic wiring is entangled with our own. The perception interprets acquisition as being synonymous with love. The natural mind's perspective, the natural mind's, or what we would refer to as perspectives, indicator system, which uses chemical releases as physiological guides to help us determine which external properties and values to connect with, and which external properties and values we should remain distanced from, or that we should fear or remain separate from. Okay? Posturing produces hormones and neurotransmitters that result in sustenance for the ego parasite. Posturing is most evidently observed in the transaction/phenomenon that we refer to as romantic love. In romantic love, when people are processing information through their perceptions, people tend to confuse the concepts of acquisition and ownership, what they refer to as attraction, with bonding because of the acute physiological similarities and bodily responses. Okay, and I am reading from my notes here so as to remain concise. So yeah, I'm looking over. Posturing is a form of addiction. It's a secondary hunger. So these are all things that need to be taken into consideration from the vantage point of perception or posturing. The fear of or desire to put distance between oneself and denigration is synonymous with the fear of death. Most people are going to be afraid to process this information. They're going to be afraid to kind of, entertain these ideas because these ideas conflict with what they've been conditioned to believe is right. And there's a mechanical reason for why this transaction is taking place inside of you. Let's just be honest. The ego parasite makes us deathly afraid of being wrong. When some of you review this information, your ego parasite will want to reject it. And in so, it's going to encourage some of you to react by becoming angry, irate, hostile. It's going to force a lot of you to feel threatened. All right? Listen, my job isn't to try and tell you what to believe. It's not to try and steer you or steer your perception into seeing things as I see them. My job is to help you figure out how to use what's around you to help you arrive at truth. If you're feeling threatened by this information, then it's like, you know what? I want you to ask questions. I want you to, you're going to have the comment section down here below. I want you to use that. I want you to ask questions. This is the only way for you to get past this parasite, okay? This is the only way for you to not be trapped, not only by the filtered information that this world has given to you, but, to not be swept away by concepts that are exponentially more refined than, some of the things that you've allowed yourself to believe over the years. My job is, again, it's not to steer you, it's to help you grow in your understanding. So please ask questions. All right? Your reactions, to be honest with you, they're kind of expected and anticipated. You will want to demonstrate personal value by attacking that which undermines your perceptions. This isn't your choice. This is the way the ego parasite works. So anytime something goes against your perception of the world, this parasite forces you to want to react with hostility. You can beat it by asking questions. What I offer you in this series of works is freedom from parasitic exploitation. Okay, so basically at this point, I want to kind of talk about some of the ascendant thinkers throughout history. Basically, all of their central themes and the central themes of their messages have been the same, and that's essentially the relegation of perceptive thinking, the abandonment of personal importance, the abandonment of desire, the abandonment of the pursuit of acquisition, the abandonment of opinions about others, and the desire to build reputation or to posture. Essentially, all these people, we all talk about the exact same thing. The Buddha, Lao Tzu, Gandhi, Wetsukodo, and how so many other people essentially, even in the Bible, Jesus' teachings, or at least what can be deciphered from what he was quoted as saying in the Bible, essentially support the same themes. It's the abandonment of perceptive thinking. Well, you know, all of these gentlemen, and ladies, because it's like it wasn't just men throughout the years, it was women too. Just not all of them reach, national and international stage. Basically, they approach this from a spiritualist standpoint. Well, essentially, my work is a continuation of the same message that they have been sharing throughout the years. However, unlike my predecessors, the focus of my work is going to be on, unifying the interpretations of quantitative values and their correlating intellectual themes. My work is going to incorporate unifying the interpretations of quantitative values with correlating intellectual themes, and then demonstrate how this system of logic not only applies to all things, but in fact is the very foundation of natural order and existence. Natural order is so much more advanced than what we believe we've discovered to this point. It's so much more fundamentally sound than the things that we have allowed to guide us in our efforts for discovery. And like my predecessors, I'm fortunate enough to have been gifted with a perspective that allows me to see natural order, to understand natural order, and to observe and compare how it aligns with our discovery. And I got to tell you, it's crushing us. In order for us to progress to where we need to be as a species, not just in terms of our potential, but even in terms of what we want and what we think we want, our only route, our only path is alignment with natural order. So basically, this video, this entire series of videos is they're educational to some extent, but they're not designed to format your thought process like most educative tools and paradigms. They're designed to expose you to what has always been, what will be, what will remain in spite of us. It's to help you learn how to think in spite of what we've learned, and understand that something more intelligent than us has been here this entire time. The only thing that we need to do is pay attention to what's always been, what's been around us this entire time, to relinquish self-importance and to learn from everything that's going on around us, and to understand how all of these things interlock, correlate, and build. In this installment, we wanted to get the founding concepts locked in. And in the next video, we're going to get into universal math. We're going to get into what makes the universe tick. thank you for your time. And again, please feel free to ask as many questions as you need to. I'm here. My job is to guide you, not lead. God bless you. Thank you.